we are here to discuss a very positive and refreshing piece of news amidst all of the collective misery that we're going through right now. The Madras High Court recently passed a landmark judgment, and it is a landmark judgment in every sense of the word, where the court went over and above the matter at hand to issue guidelines to protect the LGBTQ plus community. Now, the person who gave us this extremely sensitive and progressive judgment was Justice Anand Venkatesh. And what's remarkable is that he took counselling sessions. So he accepted that he didn't know, he wanted to know more about the issue that he's going to pass a judgment on. And he decided to rope in psychologists and take counselling sessions to better understand same-sex relationships. And in his own words, to be fully woke before he passed a verdict on this issue. So I have with me Vidya Dinakaran, who is the psychologist who counselled Justice Anand Venkatesh. Vidya, before I start, I just wanted you to give us a quick recap of the case and why you were required to counsel Justice Anand Venkatesh.
Right. So this is a case of a lesbian couple from Madurai, basically, where they had already realized that their relationship was not going to be accepted by their families and were left with no choice but to move away from their families. And they had reached to Chennai and they had found a place to stay, but then the police sort of caught up to them. And what followed was a procedure of demeaning dialogues and threats from the families, from the police officials, and it took a while for them to sort of find a safe space and to sort of move in there. And meanwhile, a lot had happened just between that time frame. So how I got involved into the case was through a queer therapist herself. So I had attended this queer formative counselling program, training that is offered by Meribala Health Initiative and TIS Mumbai a couple of years ago. And one of the facilitators sort of referred my name to the lawyer who was vouching for the petitioners. And a list of suggestions were given to the judge, and since a couple of people pointed out that, I'm someone who's working in the field, I was chosen, and that's how the case came into me. So the first round sort of involved counselling the petitioners and both the families. Yeah. The second round of counselling involved the judge and the families of the petitioners. So that's how I was brought to the case.
Right. So I wanted to ask you, this is the first time, I'm guessing this is the first time that a case like this has come to you, right? Where a high court judge has asked for counselling sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I not just to me, but I haven't heard it happening to my peers. I haven't heard a judge, first of all. There have been a lot of cases in history which has come to the steps of the court, and usually what happens is the judge says that they are adults, so they can choose whom they want to live with and then close the case then and there. But that sort of does not provide what is actually required for the queer couple. So this is definitely a huge shift in that sense.
I want to start by asking you what the experience was like and what were some of the biggest challenges. Like, how did he come in for the counselling sessions, and what were some of the biggest concerns that were addressed?
With the judge, of course, I was concerned about how much responsibility I had in that space, because it's a very powerful system that is stepping into the counselling room. So there was a lot of onus on me there, and what my primary focus there was to hold space for the petitions. That was something that I held on throughout the entire process, because that is the concern at the moment. With regard to challenges, of course there were challenges, but what made the process very easy was the openness and honesty with which the judge spoke about his beliefs and notions. If that space weren't there, then it would have been a struggle to sort of get through all that to him. So that sort of brought in an ease to the entire process, his openness and honesty. But with regard to challenges, yes, there were some similarities with regard to the notion the judge held and the families of the petitioners held. And some of them were how homosexuality was narrowed down to just an aspect of physical sex and that there is nothing more to it. And how he felt that something was wrong only when the petitioner spoke of their relationship. And he said that he no longer saw two women but a couple, and only then he realized that it is definitely more than just physical intimacy. So he wanted to understand if there was anything different about a homosexual relationship, which is sort of causing this difficulty towards accepting it as a legitimate relationship. So that was one thing that we worked through. The other was, of course, the influence of religion and science in sort of rigidifying the stigmatization that surrounds LGBTQ community. And since he also came from an upper caste privileged sector in the society, all those notions also came to the front about what has been said in the scriptures, what has been told in the diagnostic statistical manual, which mental health professionals use. So all of these came to the forefront and we were working with that. And what was very challenging in the whole aspect was how it was very difficult to bring about narratives, because the judge very openly said that he has never been exposed to anything of the sort in his life, neither in his own personal life nor has he heard about it from his friends or family or anybody. So in order to bring that narrative, of course, I had to bring in lived experiences of queer people and some of the exercises that I learned at the Queer Affirmative Counselling program. One of them, which is very interesting, and I thought I would mention it here, is how anyone will bring up a child if the genitals of the child weren't disclosed at birth. And how will you figure out the sex? How will you figure out the gender? What sexuality will the child be? So how will the parenting of such a child be? So all these were small exercises which had to be used because of the lack of narratives. So all these posed challenges in the process.
I want to ask you, how different were the sessions with the family? Especially with regard to what you were saying, which is that the judge showed an openness to understand the issue better, same-sex relationships better, and the families were coming from a different space. So how were you able to tackle, both of these?
Right. Though both of them had similar emotions, the openness and the willingness definitely helped in the session with the judge. With regard to the families, it was more of the repercussions from the society that they had to face because of what their daughters did. That was the prime focus in the session with one of the families. With the other families, there was an involvement of the intersectionality. Because both the families came from different socioeconomic strata, different castes. So all that had to be taken into account, because there were a lot of accusation on one of the families saying that they were sort of agreeing to the relationship only because they did not have enough financial support and they were dependent on the daughter for the support. And many such accusations which says, you haven't brought up your daughter well, you haven't taught her well, and everything is just your fault. There was constant shaming that was involved on the other family, which came from a lower socioeconomic strata. Right. And with the other family, it was more of honor and shame that took the center stage, and how, in order to defend that, culture was brought into play, religion was brought into play, and position in the society was brought into play, saying how all of these things do not support homosexuality, and how is it that they alone can do this in a society like this. So even though it seemed like there was some willingness to open up to this idea, immediately it used to be countered by what will happen if I say this to people around. So that sort of came.
Yeah, and you were saying that the judge wanted to know what were some of the major challenges that makes this entire community, like that sort of invisibilizes the entire community, right? Like why there isn't so much being said or spoken about, and why it's not mainstream enough. So, what were some of the discussions in that regard?
Right. And this is a discussion that happened with the families too, because the question or the assumption was that people who belong to the minority group belong there because there is a deviance, because they have done something wrong, and there is absolutely nothing else. So we had to sort of ensure that we talk about the journey of a queer person or anybody who comes from the marginalized sector, for that fact. How different are their lives? What are the things that they will have to face? So in this case, it was more about the safety of the person. So a very small example that was used during the session was if a queer couple will have to, let's say, rent a home. How do they go about it? So they are always left with only two options: either to out themselves and sort of be prone to potential threats, or the other situation is to invisibilize themselves constantly. And both are situations that a cis hetero person will never think of in their lives. We never think of our sexuality. We never think of, should I reveal, should I not reveal, what will happen if I reveal. All these are never our concerns. To live in this environment constantly is extremely stressful. So majority of them do not even talk about it. And if there were spaces where we could explore and openly talk about these things, a lot of people would actually come out. And I don't think it will be a minority anymore. But there is absolutely no space, no safety, and no support to sort of lean back on in case something goes wrong. Because every direction they turn to, there is always a potential threat with police personnel, with lawyers, with mental health professionals, with housing, job, anything. There is always a potential threat which they constantly have to be mindful of. And also the fact that stigma has been attached to them, saying that this is a disorder and that it needs to be cured. So all these things will never want someone to, sort of wear their sexual identity on their sleeves.
I wanted to, ask about Dr. Trinitra, who was also roped in, and the judge had also spoken about her and how she was very instrumental in changing his perspective. I tried getting in touch with her, but unfortunately, we couldn't bring her on board. But to understand the issues facing the community from a person who's actually experienced, like that's her lived experience, did that have a significant impact on the judge, because he was able to firsthand understand what it is?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the best suggestion or the best thing that I think I made during the session. And I was also aware that there was enough support from community organizations like Orinam and PCBC, who were also part of the process, who said that, we will provide you with members with whom the judge can interact with. So that sort of gave me the confidence to suggest that he can talk to a member of the community along with the parent. So because that relates directly with this case, because here it's all about acceptance and what is hindering that process. So bringing a person who is queer with a parent who has openly accepted the identity of her child, that definitely did have a significant impact. And also because of the fact that she was a doctor by profession, she was also able to offer insights on the pathologization of queer community and the identity itself. So that definitely had a significant impact because it came from a person who lived through it.
And by pathologization, you mean how it's all often treated as a disease which can be cured.
Exactly. And and the techniques for curing it, be it aversion therapy or electroconvulsive therapy, or surgeries for that matter, and many such things. Yeah, all these become a part of pathologies.
Right. And from the judgment, once you came across the judgment, what did you think were some of the best points?
It's very hard to pick one like that, but when it came to the interim guidelines, that is definitely a big support, because it talks about what sort of safety and support the society needs to provide for runaway queer couples, starting from where do they first reach and what kind of services need to be offered there, and from there how do they get connected to another place. Because often in this process, a queer person faces a lot of trauma, which sort of worsens everything for them. So in order to ensure that they have a safe travel path, that was something that was brought out in the guidelines, which I think is really significant. The other one is where he spoke about the shelter homes for queer couples. And when we say queer couples, there are a lot of intricacies that the safe homes need to be mindful of. Because someone, when we say queer, they can fall anywhere, not just LGBTQI+. There is a lot of distinction even in that. Like someone can be a trans man who has not pre-transition, which means where does he stay? Does he stay in a place which has majority women or a man? What do we base that decisions on? So it was sort of discussed that NGOs sort of have a better understanding of how a safe home needs to be constructed for a queer person, but just because of the lack of funds that they weren't able to do that. So he directed the ministry to sort of take care of that aspect for the NGOs so that they can go ahead in developing shelter homes like that, which I think is another significant factor. And the final one is the suggestion for sensitization programs for all the stakeholders involved, involving police personnel, lawyers, educational system, workplaces, all of these places, coming with a suggestion of who will have to provide all these sensitization programs. So it is not always a cis, hetero, normative person who provides all these things. Somebody who's undergone experiences, somebody who has done enough labor in this place already. They are the ones who need to provide the sensitization programs. And how it needs to be
the NGOs you're like people from the community?
Yes, definitely people from the community. Because nowadays a lot of people are coming up, like for example, even in the profession of law or mental health, people are opening up about their sexualities, which means they have the lived experience plus they have the professional expertise to sort of take people through this. So I think the entire sensitization program suggestion is also a huge welcome.
Right. And finally, I wanted to ask you, do you think it goes a long way, to actually reach out to professionals when such cases come, for judges? Because this is in every way, it's like it's the first of its kind, right? As far as we know. And when such cases come where there's not enough information or there's not enough understanding, when you reach out to someone and get a better perspective, does it really help bring out better judgments, in your opinion?
Absolutely, because a change, if we are to bring a political or a systemic change, if it comes without the authenticity of the person having undergone change themselves, I don't think it will have an impact, nor will it last long. So I think it is definitely important to go through such a process. And also the stakeholders who are involved in this, like for example, it is my responsibility to involve the community members also into this, because they have a better perspective, to involve organizations who are already working, those who've done enough amount of work here. We just have to transfer it here. So it's also the responsibility of stakeholders once it is transferred to one person. So I think it definitely goes a long way in bringing about a more significant change. Also a lot of destigmatization and normalizing seeking help itself.
So thank you so much, Vidya, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.